Welcome back for day 6 of Let's Build a Sketch App. I'm Brian Meerman with Bloom Tech, bringing you this Introduction to Java course. At this point, you've learned quite a bit. You have a working pen drawing app, you have learned how to call methods, use values, store some data, ask questions in your code, and write a basic for loop. That's a lot of knowledge very quickly. Each of these topics has been touched upon, but diving deeper into each will reveal additional nuances and options that will power up your programming capabilities. Today's goal, we want to make a customized button that can be pressed upon, and when pressed, it'll perform an action. We'll be looking into the idea of classes in Java, which is a fundamental part to how the Java language operates.
All right, current state of the project. We have a pen, and yeah, if we draw on the screen, we get markings. But what if we decide that as we're drawing, I don't like what I just did. I just don't like that. I have no capability of doing anything except drawing. What we'd like to do is add in some abilities like buttons that we can click that do certain things. So we'd like to have a button up here that when I click it, I'll be able to clear the screen and redraw whatever it's trying to draw. And later, maybe we'd like to have abilities to change colors. And in the future, we might have the ability to undo and redo. We won't be getting to that, but that's some concepts that you could add into this project in the very far future once you learn more. But right now, let's focus on the idea that you'd like to get a button that appears, and when we click on it, it has the ability to clear the screen. That is our goal. To get to that step, though, we need to learn that Java doesn't have a lot of things built in for it you sometimes need. And so if I want a number, Java's got that built in. If I want a word or phrase, it's built in. But if I want a button, it's not necessarily a built-in thing to Java, and sometimes we have to write it. If you go over to the taskbar, you'll find out that we do have a buttons folder over here. And inside there is a clear button. And that is because we started providing you a piece of the code. We're going to be working through this code today and figure out what does it all mean. Because we could have given you nothing and said, hey, let's build an entire class from nothing. But I think it would have been a little bit too much right off the bat. So we're going to go ahead and start with a clear button that's partially written. We're going to fill in the code. But first, let's figure out what it is that we're talking about here. So I'm going to start by going over to notes. So what we're about to do is we're about to define a new class. Technically, it's already defined for us because you have a starting point. We're going to define a new class. And I'll talk about what a class is for a moment. So Java is what is called an object-oriented language. And that means that anytime you need something a little bit more complicated than a number or a true-false, you have to write a class for it. And that class defines a new data type. And that new data type, you can build objects out of it. Think of it kind of like an architect. An architect designs a blueprint for a house. And then that blueprint can be used to build thousands of houses or even millions of houses potentially. Now, the class is the blueprint. You're saying, this is the style. This is what I would like it to have in my code. And then I can turn those into actual objects to make them run. A little bit over your head potentially, but let's go ahead and just think about it for a second. Let's say I want to keep track of an object that represents a location in a hotel, a single room in a hotel. And so let's say I wanted to have a hotel room. People can book this hotel room online. Well, a hotel room is not built into Java. What kind of properties make up that hotel room? So you have to think, what are the properties? What makes one hotel room unique from another room? And then also think, okay, what can a hotel room do action-wise? What can it do? Now think of this as like a booking system. What can you do with them? So we have to think of the actions. And the names for these can be many different overs. You might hear the word properties. You might hear the word fields. You might hear the word instance variables. These all represent what data is it that makes a hotel room unique from another hotel room. For example, I might keep some properties of maybe the actual number. So the room number itself might be a property. Maybe that would be an integer. And I might keep track of a Boolean that represents, are pets allowed? Pets allowed. That would just be a true or false, which would mean it's a Boolean value. And there might be many other things. Maybe I keep track of the cost per night. Maybe I keep track of a Boolean that represents, is it currently booked? Is booked. And so all of these might be smaller pieces of a larger concept called hotel room that we keep track of the properties of. And you can probably come up with many, many different other ones that might make one hotel room unique from another. The number of beds it has, the size of the beds, is it ocean view or not, if you have those kind of situations. So you can come up with lots of different properties and figure out what makes one hotel room unique. Actions are going to be methods, the actions that a hotel room can do once built. So I might decide, well, a hotel room could get booked, so book it. Maybe that's just one thing. Maybe someone could check in. Maybe someone could check out. Maybe someone could request assistance. Maybe they're missing a towel or something, so request assistance. So those are actions that the hotel room could do. Imagine this is an online system. You have the ability to book out online, check out online, or request assistance. Those are all some actions that a hotel room might be able to do. And so every class is built up of properties, the data that's storing, and then the actions, the things it can do. When we switch over to look at the Java version of that, how it actually is written, you'll see that we're just making variables. This top part, this is just variables. In the bottom part, these are just methods. There's one more parse in here that we haven't talked about, which is called a constructor, which is a special type of action for building one. So I'll just write it in here for a second, but we have one other part here called constructor. This allows a hotel room to be built. So builds a hotel room. And maybe when you're building a hotel, you define, hey, this particular room is going to be a 2-bedroom. It's going to be a non-pet allowed room. And the price per night is $169 or something like that. And then you build the next room and you decide, well, this is a 1-bedroom. Maybe it's a king size, 1 bed. Maybe it does allow pets and it's only $99 a night. So every room might have different values that get set up, and the constructor will do that for us. All right, let's take that concept, those notes, those are not actually any code there, and convert that over and see what does it look like when we're actually looking at a class in Java. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the clear button class in a tab so we can kind of take a look at what's going on here. And I do not need you to fully understand this. This is a starting point because there's a lot to learn about classes and we just want to get a general feel of what's going on. So when we look at the clear button, first you see some imports. We'll talk about that later, but we have the idea that this clear button needs to pull in some code from other locations so it can use it. So I need to think about those other classes and say, hey, I need colors and mouse info and painting tools. Then we have this first line here that you would eventually, when you write some classes, start realizing, oh, that's that line of code. I can just type it public class and then whatever the class name is. This is a class called clear button. And then here, based on my notes, do you think those are the properties, the constructor, or the actions? This section right here. Well, every clear button is going to be unique from each other because each button is going to have its own left, top, size, and color. So we might make a small clear button. We might make a large clear button. But each one of them is going to be unique. This is going to be where it's going to be located, how big is it going to be, and what color is the background of it going to look like. We've already defined these traits for you, but we're eventually going to be able to make our own as well. This is a special part right here, and it doesn't look very good because it's too long of a line of code. I'm going to hit some enters after commas so we can see it a little bit easier. And this is our code that identifies the constructor. Now, just hear that word for a second, constructor. This is what constructs, builds a clear button. This right now is just some code. Eventually, we're going to want a clear button. And the code that goes on inside here is going to say, hey, when a clear button is built, what occurs? Generally, this is the time where our properties get set to their initial values. So someone, when building a clear button, is going to have to tell us where do they want it, how big do they want it to be, and what color do they want it to be. And then those properties will get set for us automatically. And again, right now, we're just looking at already existing code so we can figure out, okay, that sort of makes sense. You may not be able to type it on your own right now, but it sort of makes sense what's going on. But this builds a clear button, and we can potentially build lots of them. Everything else is going to be the methods, the actions that a clear button can do. And so when we're scrolling down here, you'll see there's quite a few. Let's go ahead and just talk about a handful of them. Draw self. Draw self is an action that says, hey, when a button exists, you can ask it to draw itself. And it just says, oh, okay, I'll put myself on the screen then. This is a method that says is pressed. That is going to return a true or false value, and it's going to calculate a true or false result. Let's take a look at that for just a minute. Can you read this for yourself and realize what is it currently doing? It is supposed to be calculating true or false, and how does it work? Take a moment, pause right here, look through that return statement and see, do you think you understand it at all? Okay, let's take a look. First, it says, if the mouse info is pressed down, that's a method call, that's a true or false. So that's a true or false statement that says, if the mouse is currently pressed. Great. Second part says, with an and, it says, hey, and the x coordinate is greater than or equal to left x. Now remember, left x is a property that every clear button will know about where is it located on the screen. So is the mouse's x coordinate greater than or equal to the left coordinate of the button? Then it says if the mouse's x coordinate is less than or equal to, think about that, the left coordinate of the button plus the size. That's going to be like how wide, that's the right side of the button. So is my mouse info less than or equal? Basically, with these two questions, is my mouse between the left and the right part of the button? And this one is the mouse between the top and the bottom part of the button. Putting it all together, if the mouse is pressed down and the mouse is between the button's locations, then this button must have been pressed, and this is going to return a true value for that Boolean. So great, that's a cool method. And here we go. Our buttons, by the way, are squares. So they're going to be very specific squares. That wouldn't work if it was, say, a triangle or a circle or any other shape. This update method is going to be called over and over and over again. It's probably going to be called about 60 times per second. And it's asking is, hey, was the button just pressed? And if so, perform the action. What action? Perform action. There we go. There's that other method. So if someone presses the button, that's the code that we just ran, the code we just walked through, then perform some action, and that currently does nothing. We'll figure out the logic for that. But we want to come up with a logic that would make sense to make this clear button do its total action capability. And finally, we have a few other methods here that are a little bit unique. Classes have all these properties, these pieces of information that's unique about them that makes one object unique to another. So if I have multiple clear buttons on the screen, one's in my top left, one's in the bottom right, maybe one's smaller than the other one, they'll have different coordinates, different sizes, potentially different colors. And so these methods down here allow anybody else to ask a particular button, hey button, what is your left X coordinate? And what is your size coordinate? So they could just ask questions. The reason this is there is because we have made these variables private, which is the design that Java uses for almost all properties. We make them private so that only the clear button itself has direct access, and we decide who else can look at these or change these values. And if we want them to look at them and change them, we use what are called getter methods, which literally just get a value, or setter methods, which we don't have in here, but would change a value. Read more about it by looking through the tutorial in the tutorial pane. Okay, so we have now seen that there is this clear button class. It has some properties. It has what's called a constructor here. It has some methods, but some of the logic is currently missing. And right now, the logic is we don't have the ability to draw ourselves, and we don't have the ability to perform an action. We have to find out what it should be for this clear button to make that unique. Now, the other logic we've already provided for you, so you don't have to worry too much about that. But right now, let's talk about draw ourselves. So the button on its own doesn't automatically just appear on the screen. We have to write the code that says, hey, when you're asked to draw yourself, do the right code. We happen to have given you two values up here, one for the mouse info, one for paint. And we already know that the paint has the ability to draw rect or draw other shapes as well, draw lines, etc. And it has the ability to change colors. So what we'd like to do is we'd like to draw ourselves. Now, think about this. We're just going to be a rectangle on the screen for the moment. Let's just make it a rectangle. So we want to draw a rectangle. Anytime you're drawing a rectangle, you need to know where and how big. And potentially you need to set the color for it. So we're going to be drawing a rectangle. To draw a rectangle, we think, what piece of information do we want? First, I'd like to make certain that the border itself is black. So let's make certain we have a black border. Then we want color on the inside to represent what color they want. Now, we could always decide this could be white. We could decide it's going to be yellow every time, whatever you want it to be. But instead, we're going to think that the properties of a clear button has these four values that make each clear button unique. That means each clear button every single time knows its own color. That's going to be the shading we want. So we want a particular filled color. So use the color value that's in this variable up here. We don't know what that is. Could be red, could be blue, whatever it is, to shade the interior of the box, of the rectangle. And then we want to draw the rectangle. But again, we have to draw a rectangle by knowing where it's going to be, how big it's going to be. And we happen to have all that information in our own properties. Each clear button will know that information of themselves. So based on the properties of this clear button, each clear button is going to be different. They might be running the same code, but they have different values in these variables, these properties. So that's it. That's what we want to do. Draw a rectangle, make it a black border real quick, change the color. Do you think you could do that? Try it on your own. You might get stuck, and that's perfectly valid, but try it on your own. Take a little bit of time right now. Pause, see if you can draw a rectangle. Okay, let's see what you've done. First, I have a hard time memorizing everything. So I'm going to go over the documentation, and I know I'm going to use in the painting tool. So let me open that up and realize, okay, I want a rectangle, and I want to make certain it has certain properties to it. So the method I want to use is draw rect. So maybe I'll copy that. I'll paste it in. Not that I'm actually going to use that as my code, but I do know I want to do that. So that's the code I want to use. I also know I need to set the fill color, and let's see here. I'll already have a color, so I'm going to use that one right there because color is one of my properties. So I'm going to copy that. Actually copy, let me go ahead and right click and copy, and I'll paste that in as well. I'm definitely going to do that before I draw my rectangle so that it fills it in correctly. And one last thing is I'd like to set the line color. Not necessarily is this 100% needed, but this is just to make certain that the line colors end up being a black border so I don't get anything else on it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that as well. let's bring that in there. All right, those are the three methods I want to use. That's not obviously real code. And so to use those methods, I know that they come from the painting tool class, and I have a painting tool variable called paint. So I'm going to do the same thing we did before, which is I'm going to do paint dot set line color. Set line color needs a color. What color do I want? Black. How do I use black? Color dot black. All right, that does that one. We do the same thing for the set fill color. Paint dot set fill color. What color do I want? I don't want to just make up a color this time. I don't want to say it's always going to be black or white or green. I'm going to use the variable that makes this clear button unique from every other clear button. So I'm going to change this to say color with a lowercase c that says go use my property up here that says that is my color value. And so there we go. And then I want to do my actual drawing of the rectangle. So I'm going to draw rect with my paint. That needs 4 pieces of information. I need the left x. Now I happen to have a variable literally called left x. I'm assuming that matches what's supposed to go in here. So left x, then top y, which is my other variable, represents where I am on the screen. And then my width and height, it's going to be a square, very specifically a square. So my width and height is going to be the same thing, and that's going to be used the variable size. So size and size. Now, every single clear button can draw themselves using three lines of code, but if one clear button has a different color, it'll show up differently than another clear button that has a different color. So every clear button individually have their own values to these 4 variables, which means they could all look entirely different, yet they're running the same exact code. I can go ahead and delete all these comments. Think about what we just did. We have the ability now to draw ourselves. One last thing. This is going to be able to draw a rectangle on a screen. It's going to be filled with whatever color. So if it's a white interior, it'll be a white interior. Let's make it look like an actual clear button. And what I mean by that is something that looks like it erases. If you just have a rectangle on the screen, just a square on the screen that's white on the inside, that doesn't necessarily look like it's going to clear. Maybe that just means use a white color. What I like to do is I'd like to put a red slash through it. Maybe a red slash. So imagine a square on the screen. I like to put a red slash from the top left corner to the bottom right corner. And I like to put that on the screen. So first I'm going to do is I'm going to set my line color to red. And then I want a red slash that goes from the top left to the bottom right. Top left to the bottom right. Can you think about how to make that occur correctly in this square that we've drawn? Pause here, try it on your own. All right, I want to draw a red line from the top left to the bottom right. So I'm going to be doing a paint dot, and then the method call was, again, we're using a draw line. We need 4 numbers, the x, y, x, y. So I need to give it 4 coordinates, draw line. I need the x coordinate of one side, the y coordinate of another side, the x coordinate of another side, and the y coordinate of another side. Those aren't real code. But let's think about this. Top left corner of the actual square we're trying to draw. That would be the left x and the top y. So I'm going to change this to left x and top y. I'm going to calculate the bottom right corner. Well, we don't have any variables up here that represents the bottom right. So instead what I can do is I take the left x and add size to it. If I take the left x and add size to it, I'll be slightly further over. And that'll be my right side of the screen for that particular button. So I'll do left x plus the size. I'll do the same thing for the bottom part, which would be the top y plus the size. Now I have a great method that will draw any clear button, no matter what information it's given, it'll draw it correctly. How do you get to test it? We're not there yet. So if you've got this, if you're following along, we have the ability to draw ourselves, but we have not gotten the ability to test it. So let's take a moment and learn how to do that soon. All right. So to be able to test this, we actually need to get a clear button on the screen. And that right now, just because we wrote the code for a clear button does not make it appear on the screen. For that, we need to find a place that builds things on the screen and puts something on the screen and put it in there. And that's going to be our sketchpad. So if you go back over to our sketchpad, right now, this particular program has a last mass X, last mass Y, but we don't have a button on the screen. That is something new. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a new variable up here. So one other variable that Sketchpad keeps track of. And the variable type is not going to be an int. It's not going to be a Boolean. In this case, we're going to build a clear button. And so this clear button class that we just wrote now has the ability to be built into object by saying, I would like to have a private, not int, but I'd like to have a private clear button. You can name it anything you want. So if you wanted to call it something like table, you could call it table. If you want to call it duck, you call it duck. But if you want to call it something that makes sense, you're probably going to call it something like clear button with a lowercase c. And that's going to create a variable that can store a clear button, but doesn't do anything yet. It just says I have the ability to store one. And instead, I'm going to use the equal sign to say, let's build one. Let's actually store something into this clear button. And the way to do that is something we have not seen ourselves so much, but it is up here. And that is saying, I would like to have one exist. The word new says create one, make one exist. This clear button is kind of like an architect's blueprint. The blueprint itself is not a house. But if you use the word new in front of that blueprint, you'll say build one, make one. So I'm going to use the word new and I say, I'd like to have a new clear button. That's what I'm trying to build. But unlike this screen, this mouse, and mouse in this painting tool, it needs information. It needs information to be sent in. How do I know? Because I look over here at this clear button and realize this is what is called the constructor. And the constructor finds what information needs to be sent in when creating a clear button. And you look inside the parentheses here, just like any other method, you realize I need to send it 3 integers and a color. So I need to send it an X coordinate, a Y coordinate, a size, and a color. Okay, so knowing that this is the same thing as calling a method, I need to put something in the parentheses and say I need to send it 3 numbers and a color. So I'm going to hit enter here so we have a little bit of room. I want number 1, comma, number 2, comma, and a color. Oh no, 3 numbers and a color. 3 numbers and a color. I want 3 numbers and a color. First number is going to be the X coordinate. Second number is going to be the Y coordinate. Third number is going to be the size, like how big this particular button is going to be. And the last one is going to be color. Let's go ahead and make it color.white as the color. So we have a white color. And the first number, I'm going to put it up close to the top left. And I'm just going to use number 5, just so it's like 5 pixels away from the side. It's not right on the edge. I'll do 5 down. So it's 5 over 5 down. So it's relatively centered. And for the size, I'm going to make it 20. I've thought about these numbers for a while, so I know what they're going to be. And these aren't that long of a line of code. So if I were to move that over, I could probably put these all in one line and it would look just fine. But with the limited screen real estate we have right now, if you like it vertical, you can do it vertical. But just so you can see what it actually looks like in general, there we go. I want a new variable. I'm naming the variable clear button with a lowercase c. That could be confusing. If you like to name anything else, please do so. I'm building an object of it, and I'm saying this particular one is going to be at 5 over 5 down, 20 wide, and color.white will be its background. There we go. We have built a clear button. Problem is, only a computer's memory. We've never actually asked it to do any of the actions that it has. So it has the action here of drawing itself. And if that code were to run, it would put itself on a screen. So let's see that. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go back over to our Sketchpad and we'll say that now there is a clear button that exists, but it's not going to run any of that code unless we ask it to. So I'm going to go into the initial launch that says when the program starts, we're already changing the color of the background. We're already putting a bunch of circles on the screen. We're already putting the interior sketch surface. Let's go ahead and add one more thing. Let's make that button appear. Let's call one its actions. So we have a variable called clear button. And anytime you want a variable to do its action, you do the variable name dot, it's like you're calling any other method, and you call one of the methods on it. So the method we want to use is this draw self method. It takes nothing in the parentheses. So I'm going to say clear button dot draw self. Put our parentheses there, put a semicolon, and now let's see what happens. So I'll stop that. I'll run it again. And there we go. So we have a clear button on the screen with a red slash through it. That's pretty cool. You got a button to appear on the screen. And just to show you that we can make as many buttons as we want, I'm going to go ahead and copy this. I'm going to paste it. I'm going to call it clear button 2, just so you can see it. I'm going to put it somewhere else. I don't really care what it is. I'm going to put it 50 over and maybe 100 down. And I'll make it 50 wide. Instead of white, I'm going to make it green. Maybe lime, actually, just lime. And I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say clear button 2.draw self just to show you that I can make as many of these as I'd like. So I'll stop that. I'll run it again. And here we go. Look at that. We are now running the exact same code. They're both using the exact same code, but look at the differences. That our clear buttons, just by changing the values here, got 2 completely different results. Now we have one more problem. What is the goal of a clear button? Not just appear on the screen. We could have written anything to make it appear on the screen. We just hopefully, like I said, when it clicks itself, when it actually gets clicked on, then something actually occurs. And right now, nothing occurs. So our next step, let's add the actual ability of these clear buttons to do the clearing. Okay, first off, what does it mean to clear the screen? The clear the screen literally just means put another giant white box on this interior. we really want to run the exact same code that this has right here, this exact same code. We want to run it again, but we want to run it when someone clicks on the screen. So I'm going to copy that code right there that says, I like to have a big white rectangle that's at this particular coordinates and puts it on the screen. I'm going to go over to the clear button and say, okay, if you think about the logic right now, this update says if the clear button is ever pressed, perform an action, but the perform action right now is empty. Which code do we want to run when we actually make the buttons get clicked? We like to run the code we just copied. So we do the exact same thing that originally made the first big white background rectangle. So if we run this, we'll find out. And here we go. Let's find out. We have some buttons. We have some logic that says if they are asked to perform their action, they'll clear the screen. So let's draw something. Let's click them. And nothing happens. But why? Why does nothing happen? Remember the problem we had up here with this draw self is we wrote the code for draw self, then we tried running it and nothing appeared. And the reason is that we have to ask for an action to occur. And so, yes, this update method might be checking to see, is the mouse pressed? And if so, perform the action. Is it pressed directly on the actual square? Then perform the action. But if that code is never asked to be run, nothing occurs. So one last part. Let's go over to a Sketchpad again. And let's think about this. This is the current update code for our Sketchpad. This is the code that says, hey, run all of this. Well, that actually is being called over and over and over again. And if we want other code to run over and over and over again, we got to make certain we put it in the update and say, do that as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go right down here, right before this last curly bracket here. I'm going to say, hey, I'd like to have my two buttons. Well, maybe just one of them right now. Maybe my first button, my one that's called a clear button. I'd like my clear button to perform its actions by doing clear button dot. Which action do I want to have over and over and over performed? Let's see. I'd like to have it. I don't actually want that one to perform every moment. Because if that happened every moment, we'd be constantly just clearing the screen. We'd never see any of our drawings. I actually want this update to run every moment so that it says, if we're pressing the button, then perform the action. So I'm going to say clear button dot update. Put some parentheses on that and say, that's the method I like to have happen. I like to have that happen every time the entire Sketchpad is updating, which is about 60 times per second. And let's see. Currently I've only asked the single clear button, the first one, to update. Let's see what that does to our program. Okay, let's test it. We have drawing. We have buttons. That one I never asked to do. That was our second button. So that one doesn't do anything on its own when I click it because I was never told to update. But if I click the first button, look at that. It clears the screen. Unfortunately, it cleared the screen and we lost that other button. Why? Because all we're doing is drawing a big rectangle on top of it. That other button is actually underneath this giant rectangle right now. But it cleared the screen. So as long as you don't put our clear button in the giant rectangle, it'll be fine. Let's go ahead and clear this up. I don't actually need that second clear button. I don't need that second clear button at all. Getting rid of it. Let's go back to the logic we just did. We have a new clear button class. It was partially written for you. You'll learn how to write this more on your own if you go into a deeper dive on Java. But we have this clear button class. Each clear button has information about it that makes it unique. Each clear button has information that when sent in as it's being built, stores correctly so that when a clear button is built, you send it the right information and it builds it uniquely. Each clear button now has the capability of drawing itself and the code actually makes sense using the individual properties that makes the clear button different. And the clear button has the ability to, if it's pressed, check to see all of its data and say, hey, based on my properties, is the mouse actually pressed on me? Every moment in time, the clear button is being asked to update, but only because we told it to. We didn't put this inside this update down here. If we didn't say clear button update, that wouldn't run. But because we told it to update, it's going to keep doing that over and over again. And when it updates, if it's pressed, based on logic up there, we will then draw a new rectangle on the screen and clear the old screen. But hopefully we'll have the ability to get a nice drawing pen that we say, I don't like that, erase it, draw something else. Oh, don't like that either, erase it, draw something else. Fantastic. What's our next step? Our next step is add even more buttons. Yeah, we have a button, but what if we want more buttons that maybe we control the color of the pen? We don't just always make it random right now. Maybe we decide we'd like to have a button that says, I'd like to be drawing with blue and only blue. That's our next step.
You just built an interact button so people using your Sketch app can draw, erase, and draw again. You also introduced quite a few concepts of classes in Java. Research shows you're much more likely to remember what you've learned because you're putting into practice as you go. That's our approach to learning at Bloom Tech too. In our courses, you build projects based on problems software engineers see in their daily work. You also code live, line by line, with our expert instructors. That kind of hands-on learning sticks and provides the experiences that gets our graduates jobs faster. You can try out BloomTech's backend development course for free in our risk-free trial. In the trial, you'll get a taste of what it's like to be a BloomTech learner, and you'll build an interactive photo sharing app, just like you're building a cool project here in Replit. Head over to bloomtech.com/Java to find out more. Otherwise, I'll see you tomorrow for day 7 of Let's Build a Sketch App.